It was 1200 test, 800 EQ, 800 Tren E, and 100 Anadrol, and a bottle of Ceristim a day. But I ran it for 8 weeks, and I gained 20 pounds.
Yeah, never to be seen again. Do you guys want to briefly discuss how to maximize your off season as the final topic for this podcast? So, even though it's summer's coming around and everybody's dying to get in shape, we discussed on the podcast with IFBB Pro John Jewett that using more steroids in the off season might be a suitable approach if you really want to gain that size. Now, I think initially still you might want to use less compounds in the off season because the food volume goes up and the caloric intake goes up, and then you can modulate your training. But there comes a point in time where more food and less drugs might not get you to that size you want. So I'm talking about getting from 250 to 300 pounds, not from 150 to 200 pounds. Kurt, what would be your strategy?
Well, according to all the modern pros, it's 300 test and 200 primo, right? three units of GH.
It's fucking exhausting, dude.
I don't know. I've had the best luck with pushing hard for shorter periods of time. I would rather run a few grams for 8 to 12 weeks and get the job done and then pull back out and hold it versus just kind of linger in some gram territory where you're not really getting much out of, right? And you're still building up that fatigue. It's still not really healthy for you. I mean, most of the big guys probably used pretty heavy cycles at one point in their life to get to that size, and then they don't need quite as much now.
Unless they want to push upwards. So if they want to jump a weight class or they really want to go ham for the Mr. Olympia, then the dose just escalate upwards to the multiple grams, Yeah,
I mean,
unfortunately, they don't talk about it.
No, they talk about what they currently use now to hold their shape, but that's pretty irrelevant once you're already that big. It would be like, if someone asked me at the gym what I'm on 150 milligrams of test every 5 days, but that's not what I use to get there.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I use to hold that. That's a whole different story.
Yeah. And they call you a liar for running 250 tests or 300 tests. When in reality, I went up 2.5 grams, 3 grams at periods of time. And that's where most of my size came from. And in my last off season, I was on 1.5, 1.7 grams combined. And I was pretty big. And that's with Increlex and growth hormone and all the good stuff. So how can we do it healthily though? Like if you say that like maybe a higher dose for a shorter period of time and then easing back, is that better than slowly escalating the dose upwards and having like this 2-year off season where you're just an increasingly progressive dose just ending up at a couple grams?
I don't know. Is there any, Dean, have you ever seen any studies to show any data if that's any safer? I don't think there is anything that exists.
No.
I would rather push. I mean, the healthiest compounds can be testosterone and growth hormone, right? They're endogenous.
Yeah.
So I would leverage those harder. I think with test and GH, you can accomplish a ton. You might not need other compounds.
That seems to be the most sustainable. Of course, people get too excited for the other compounds. Like I need DECA during the off season, need Anadrol during the off season, and there's something to say for it.
Oh, that's what I used in my last cycle. I mean,
my
last cycle was 1200 test, 800 EQ, 800 Tren E, and 100 Anadrol, and a bottle of Ceristim a day. But I ran it for 8 weeks, and I gained 20 pounds.
Yeah,
and I've been on TRT, and my blood work was fine, and I've been on TRT ever since. And only because I've purposely been downsizing, I lose anything. I lost 3 pounds when I came off the cycle, and my weight basically stayed the same all the way through the Arnold, which was 5 months after the cycle. And I just decided that I didn't want to. I wanted to be able to run again. Basically, I was sick of not being able to move. And
so that's exactly how I felt when I was 265. It's like, I need to be mobile again. This is ridiculous. I can't even get out of bed without being out of breath.
Yeah. So I did that to myself. That wasn't some lack of drugs. I think it's really easy to hold what you've built with, you don't need that much food. You don't need that many drugs. But I don't know. I think like what Chase did, right? Where he escalated, I think Chase Irons escalated this dose up over a long period of time until he got to a thing. There is something to be said about that. Is that as efficient as just, I mean, I didn't go right to that dose, but is there something to be said about bombarding yourself once you have some level of experience with the proper chemicals and just getting the job done and pulling out? I would still opt for that, and you saw my labs. My labs were not affected if I stayed on if I use, let's say, Test and Primo to do that, but I stayed on for 4 months, would my labs have been better, worse? I don't know.
It seems to be like a duration thing. And I think the longer you expose yourself to even moderate to higher dosages, the worse it becomes. Now, again, compound selection highly contributes into that, and experience and how you can mitigate the side effects by doing blood work, using ancillaries, little adjustments to your nutrition, right? I mean, and avoiding particular compounds that are worse than others. Like you saw my C-reactive protein went up so much from epicathogen. And so even though I would be in favor of increasing your follistatin levels through some sort of pathway, epicathogen might not be the suitable one. Again, based on an anecdotal experience of one using my blood work, personally, I would not use that in the future, but maybe use YK11 or follistatin 344 to kind of leverage that follistatin and myostatin inhibiting pathway to really maximize the gains. And you can make tremendous progress in a very short period of time, or you can do it a little bit slower, but then you have to limit compound selection to bioidentical hormones, which is usually what I preached, in the step-by-step cycle design. Like if you're going to do this for longer periods of time and start at 250 test and end up at 2.5 grams, then just use test and GH and insulin. If you like insulin, I like insulin. But because your body seems to tolerate that better than going on a gram of test and a gram of DECA and then 500 boldenone on top, or a gram of boldenone and 500 DECA on top, and then throwing the anadrol at the end. Their blood work parameters are generally a little bit worse. Yep. On a drug stack, you might be bigger though. So due to the synergy.
Yeah, but I mean, I used probably some very harsh chemicals when I did mine. I think some of the things that mattered is I ate a balanced diet. I did cardio every day, 7 days a week. I was super anal about doing cardio, and I never get fat. So my body's fat always stays in the single digits. And we see in all the guys I work with, the leaner they are, generally the better their blood work is. It's the blood work gets out of whack in the off season when guys are eating garbage and they're getting fat. Yep. And if you can stay in some sort of shape and do cardio, get fiber in, and take care of your health, your body can tolerate some pretty high androgen loads for a short period of time without really falling apart.
Right. So if you do non-bioidentical, it's okay to do a shorter period of time and kind of blast your socks off. And then if you want to do a longer off season, it's probably better to limit your compound selection to bioidentical stuff and then slowly taper upwards. I think we can draw a nice conclusion there. And then it really depends on what you want to be, right? Do you want to make slow progress and just be large and in charge for an entire year straight? Or go through this roller coaster where you're an absolute freak for like 12 weeks, or growing into that freak status for 12 weeks, which is basically what I did the last time. And then everybody's like, what the fuck is going on? And you're the same because you're so strong, but you start to build up like these little micro injuries, and your tendons start to hurt because you get so freakishly strong. And then you need a little bit of time off to kind of reset, regroup, restore insulin sensitivity, restore your blood work parameters if they skewed, and then do it all over again. I think, can we draw a conclusion there? Dean, what do you think?
Yeah, as I've gone older, I've sort of, I still hold a belief of what we all speak about in terms of, it's not like a mute point for discussion that you have to go to high dosages if you want to be insanely big. That is, a fact at this point that we've all discussed. Can you do it in a more healthy fashion than I think what we've sort of proposed here in terms of two solutions? Kurt's sort of short-term blast strategy, which was quite popular back in like the early 90s, and then the slow, steady bioidentical approach, which you're sort of seeding your body with stuff that already naturally exists, albeit in a higher amount, and you're playing off your own natural biochemistry. I see both of them being relatively equal in some sense or form, but then the other side of it is it still comes back to guesswork on your total dose of where's that sort of sweet spot of androgen receptor activation in muscle tissue, and not, like we've said, spilling over into other tissues to cause oxidative stress or side effects. That it's still, whatever way you choose to do it, if you go to the pathway of, like Kurt said, with a short, quick blast, well then it's probably not wise to have high doses of like aromatizable compounds or stuff that's going to maybe contribute to side effects because you put a higher dose of test and everything else, then you have to put more ancillaries in to control some of the side effects, and just gets a bit blurry. So do you go that route that you're using, more so anabolics with some stable dose of testosterone and everything else around it, like the test EQ anadrol perspective, or you've got, you know, your side of high dose test, you know, moderate GH, moderate insulin use depending on appetite, foods, utilization, insulin sensitivity, and then maybe you might need an aromatase inhibitor if you're someone who naturally aromatizes in a high amount and you want to have some level of control over estrogen with that high dose test. You might need a small amount to keep estrogen in check, as opposed to letting it run loose. And what we see with like angiotensin receptor issues, ACE expression, blood pressure, gynecomastia, fat gain, blah blah. They both, I think both of them serve a purpose where you have to take the genetic individuality of that person and figure out what's more appropriate. And again, it comes back to goals. Like you said, do you want to be a massive sort of, not bloat god, but do you want to gain size very rapidly in terms of, like, you know, intracellular fluid retention, glycogen, I guess a higher rate of glycogen synthesis and everything else like that? Or are you looking to, you know, accrue muscle tissue that, like Kurt has explained, sort of stays around once the lean tissue is built? It's relatively easy to maintain with the right stimulus, nutrition and training. So the end goal, to speak, is to gain muscle tissue if we're bodybuilders, but the aesthetic side of being as big as possible, you have that route also with the other strategy. I think if I was to go back and sort of do what I done for pushing size when I was competing, I'd probably still stick with, you know, a strategy like Kurt's of like a dedicated 10 or 12 week block with a heavier emphasis on higher dose anabolics with, you know, because I aromatize high naturally, keeping a very known controlled dose of test and then using the other anabolic compounds around it. But, you know, keeping that controlled like 10 to 12 week block. But back then, you know, I was training like DC style of just complete utter
annihilation,
stupidity sometimes training. Yeah, that, you know, over the last 7 weeks of being back training, being on like a strict, like my blood work came back 24 nanomole, I've gained 10 kilos by literally leveraging more food and making sure the logbook is beaten each week with still good strict tempo and stopping one rep in reserve, but still training heavy, still training with progressive overload. That size that's come back is muscle memory from when I was at my heaviest, lifting heavy and everything else. That when you develop that tissue from that past exposure and you're able to generate the stimulus that built that tissue, which is the mechanical tension and training, it'll come back. Like, I don't think, like Kurt said, there's something to consider towards total peak serum testosterone and muscle growth. But the fact that I've gone up 22 pounds in 6 weeks, my face is showing it here in the camera, that has been just through diligent tracking of more food and getting progressively stronger week on week. That the hormone level isn't really the most important thing in that whole equation, because everything else hormonally has been stable between TRT and growth hormone use. But so we then start to really see. Yeah, go for it.